Have you ever wondered how the Australian Open went from a tiny, far-flung tournament to one of the biggest events in tennis? Believe it or not, it all started in 1905 as the Australasian Championships, played on a humble cricket ground court in Melbourne with just 17 men competing. Imagine that. No crowds, no international stars, barely enough attention to make the newspapers. Back then, reaching Australia was a journey of 45 plus days by ship. So this major was more of a local adventure than the global spectacle we know today. In fact, for decades, the tournament didn't even have a permanent home. It hopped between Sydney, Brisbane, Adelaide, Perth, and even New Zealand hosted twice. That meant fans all over the region got a taste of top-level tennis, but it also made the Australian Open feel unpredictable. Many of the world's best players skipped it entirely because traveling across Australia each year was a logistical nightmare. In some seasons, the field was so weak that the tournament almost felt like a regional championship. Things finally began to stabilize in 1972 when organizers chose the Kooyong Lawn Tennis Club in Melbourne. That gave the tournament consistency, but it wasn't perfect. The grass courts could get sticky and uneven in Australia's brutal summer heat, and the small venue left fans cramped. Some pros like Bjorn Borg even skipped the tournament because they hated the courts. Fun fact, Kooyong was nicknamed the Cooked Grass Slam because of it. The name Australian Open didn't arrive until 1969, coinciding with the start of the Open era, when amateurs and pros could finally compete together. That was a huge turning point. Suddenly, Australia was officially on the map for modern tennis, even if traveling there still felt like a mission. For 82 years, the Australian Open stayed on grass, giving it that classic serve and volley style, but also creating chaos with unpredictable bounces and long matches. Everything changed in 1988 when the tournament moved to Melbourne Park, then Flinders Park, and switched to rebound ace hard courts. Suddenly, there were huge stadiums, modern facilities, and even a retractable roof. Participation shot up, ratings soared, and the Australian Open finally became the global powerhouse we know today. So, next time you watch the Australian Open, remember, what looks smooth and modern now grew out of nomadic cities, tiny crowds, and sticky grass courts. A tournament that refused to stay small and scrappy. The Australian Open evolves, hard courts, heat, and resilience. By 1988, the Australian Open was ready for a full transformation. The move to Melbourne Park wasn't just a venue swap, it came with a major surface overhaul. The old grass courts were gone, replaced by rebound ace hard courts, and eventually other surfaces would follow. This wasn't cosmetic. The change fundamentally altered how the Australian Open was played. Baseline rallies got longer, serves bounced differently, and net rushing strategies became riskier. Players who dominated on grass suddenly had to adapt or fade away, and that added a whole new layer of strategy and unpredictability to the tournament. Few fans realized just how pivotal this was. The Australian Open became the first slam in the Open era to fully embrace a surface that rewarded all court adaptability. The 1988 switch did more than change playstyle. It helped globalize the Australian Open. Suddenly, with more courts, reliable surfaces, and modern facilities, top players from Europe, the US, and beyond finally treated Melbourne as a must-play Grand Slam, not just a holiday stopover. The tournament became a magnet for world-class talent, raising its credibility to stand shoulder to shoulder with Wimbledon, Roland Garros, and the US Open. And here's where the Australian Open's resilience shines. It survived 2 world wars, with no additions from 1916 to 1918 and 1940 to 1945, and yet bounced back every single time. That tenacity became part of the Australian Open's DNA, a tournament that endures even when the world turns upside down. The tournament's institutional structure evolved alongside its courts and players. Originally under the Lawn Tennis Association of Australasia, it became the Australian Championships. By 1927 and later came under Tennis Australia from 1986 onward. That evolution wasn't just bureaucratic. It reflected how seriously Australia treated its slam, transforming it from a small regional contest into a world-class, professionally run major tournament. Finally, the Australian Open had to deal with Melbourne's notorious heat. In 1998, the Open rolled out its first official extreme heat policy, protecting players and fans when temperatures soar past 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Matches could be paused, roofs closed, and hydration enforced. A proactive step that shows how the Australian Open isn't just about history, it's about safety, evolution, and staying ahead of the curve. Surface evolution. The Australian Open has reinvented itself more than once, especially when it comes to courts and history-making champions. Up until 1987, the Australian Open was a grass court slam, serving up fast rallies, low bounces, and serve and volley tennis. But in 1988, everything changed. The tournament switched to a hard court surface called Rebound Ace, and that transformed the game. Rallies got longer, baseline play got tougher, and players with more endurance and consistency started to thrive. Rebound Ace had its own rep for being sticky under scorching summer sun. It was infamous for slowing down play and demanding greater stamina. Fast forward to 2008, and the Australian Open moved to plexicushion, which sped up the game and made it bounce more consistently. Then in 2020, the Australian Open changed to green set, giving the ball a slightly higher bounce, favoring players who love baseline rallies and sharp movement. Over those decades, the Australian Open reinvented itself and forced players to evolve or disappear. That shift in playing style opened the door wide for legends. Innovations and extreme conditions. The Australian Open's evolution. The Australian Open is renowned for its extreme conditions, especially the intense heat that can climb above 40 degrees Celsius, 104 degrees Fahrenheit. In 1998, the Australian Open introduced its extreme heat policy, which famously came into effect during the 2014 tournament. Players like Stan Wawrinka and Li Na had to navigate these brutal conditions, leading to match suspensions and breaks, prioritizing player safety. The Australian Open also pioneered the use of the wet bulb globe temperature (WBGT) metric, offering a comprehensive assessment of environmental conditions. This metric allows the tournament to make well-informed decisions about match play, ensuring the player's well-being. In addition to heat, the Australian Open is known for sudden rain, which can lead to dramatic roof closures. A memorable instance was in 2009 during the match between Rafael Nadal and Fernando Verdasco. The unexpected downpour not only paused the match but also added suspense and changed the dynamic of the game, highlighting the Australian Open's unpredictable nature. When it comes to technology, the Australian Open was a pioneer in using Hawkeye. First introduced in 2007 during a match between Rafael Nadal and Andy Murray, Hawkeye played a crucial role in ensuring the right calls were made. In that match, Hawkeye confirmed several critical line calls, ensuring that the deserving winner, Nadal, emerged victorious without controversy. This technology not only enhanced fairness but also made sure the best player won, giving fans confidence in the outcome. In 2021, the Australian Open took a bold step by going fully electronic, eliminating line judges entirely. This shift not only sped up the game but also ensured greater accuracy and consistency, reinforcing the Australian Open's reputation as a pioneer in blending tradition with cutting-edge technology, fan experience, and cultural moments. The Australian Open isn't just tennis, it's a full-blown festival of sport, music, and vibes. That's why players call it the Happy Slam, a nickname first coined by Roger Federer. He said that after the offseason, everyone hits Melbourne fresh, pumped, and genuinely happy to be back on court. The crowds prove him right. The Australian Open is the most attended Grand Slam in the world. In 2024, over 1,020,763 fans came through the gates, and in 2025, that number surged to 1,218,831. That kind of turnout turns the courts into a roaring amphitheater, especially when matches spill into night sessions. Fans pack the stands with energy that's totally different from Wimbledon's hush and whisper vibe. The atmosphere hits peak festival mode when you combine tennis with concert-style energy. Live bands, food and drink zones, giant screens, and constant buzz. The Australian Open even introduced Kids Tennis Day, a massive hit with families. In recent editions, 15,000 to 20,000 kids and families showed up for courtside clinics and fun events before the main draw kicked off. Enter arenas like John Cain Arena, where fans don't just watch, they sing, chant, cheer like it's the Davis Cup. That raw crowd energy, yelling and roaring during crucial points, adds pressure and drama players definitely feel. And every once in a while, you get matches that turn into legendary crowd moments, late night rallies, underdog comebacks, or wild finishes with the whole place buzzing. Those moments, mixed with music, lights, and tens of thousands of fans, make the Australian Open more than a tournament. It's a vibe. So when you think of the Australian Open, don't just think tennis. Think music, parties, energy, generations of fans, and a stadium that feels like your summer festival. That's why it remains the slam that people don't just watch, they experience. Before we keep going, quick timeout. If you're loving these insights and want to understand tennis deeper than the highlight reels, hit the like button and subscribe to Tennis Explainer. Now back to the video, records and champions. On the men's side, Novak Djokovic absolutely owns this slam with 10 titles, more than anyone else in Open-era history. On the women's side, Margaret Court still stands tall with 11 wins, though many came before the Open era. But the Australian Open also belongs to the players who define longevity and resilience. Take Ken Rosewall. He won Australian Open titles 19 years apart, a wild record showing that with grit and adaptability, age doesn't have to stop greatness. And then there's the epic 2012 final between Djokovic and Rafael Nadal. 5 hours, 53 minutes of non-stop tennis, the longest Grand Slam final ever. The Australian Open's surface evolution and its record book legends show a clear truth. This slam isn't built on nostalgia alone, right? It's built on adaptation, endurance, and reinvention. Grass gave way to hard courts. Earlier serve and volley stars made room for baseline warriors. And in that transformation, the Australian Open found a new identity, where legends don't just survive conditions, they master them. Travel and logistics challenges. In the early days, the Australian Open was truly a world away. Top players had to brave a lengthy 45-plus day sea voyage just to get to Melbourne, making it tough for them to commit. This, combined with the tournament's holiday scheduling, meant that the Australian Open often lacked the star-studded fields we see today. The turning point came in 1987 when the Australian Open moved from December to January, restoring its prestige and drawing the world's best players back into the fold. Format and tournament innovations. The Australian Open isn't just about tennis, it's about innovation. For example, it was the first Grand Slam to introduce a final set tiebreak, ensuring that matches were thrilling yet fair. In addition, the Australian Open pioneered the 10-point match tiebreak, which other slams later adopted. The tournament also embraced diversity by introducing a multicultural ball kid program, where kids from different backgrounds are selected through tryouts, adding a unique and vibrant atmosphere. And let's not forget the close courtside seating, giving fans an intimate view of the action. Plus, Australian Open's ground-level access to practice courts lets fans get up close and personal with their favorite players. Iconic matches and moments. Let's kick off with one of the most heartwarming comebacks in tennis history. Roger Federer's in 2017, Roger Federer made what might be the greatest comeback in Slam history. After months off for a knee injury, he walked onto Rod Laver Arena to face Rafael Nadal in a final nobody expected to go 5 sets. The scoreboard read 6-4, 3-6, 6-1, 3-6, 6-3. Federer clawed back from a breakdown in the 5th, ripped off 5 games in a row, and launched his 18th Grand Slam title. Fans still watch the moment his forehand landed on match point, the crowd going wild. A pure mix of grit, grace, hope. Back in 2012, another classic, Novak Djokovic versus Nadal. 5 sets, 5 hours, 53 minutes, guts, sweat, heartbreaks, and triumph. When Djokovic clinched it and ripped off his shirt in raw emotion, the tennis world knew this wasn't just about skill, it was war. That final became the longest Grand Slam final ever. Women's tennis had magic too. In 2017, Serena Williams won the Australian Open while being 8 weeks pregnant. She beat her sister under that pressure, under those headlines, and still delivered a masterclass. And it wasn't just physical dominance, it was a powerful message about strength and resilience. Flash to 2009 when Nadal and Fernando Verdasco threw down in one of Australian Open's toughest semifinals ever. 5 sets, 5 hours, 14 minutes. Verdasco had match points, the crowd was roaring, and every point felt like a battle. In the end, Nadal edged it, but that match is remembered as pure heart and soul tennis. Then there's 2008 when two Australians, Leighton Hewitt and Marcos Bagdatis, played so late, the match ended at 4:34 a.m., the latest finish in Australian Open history. Imagine staying up all night, every point echoing under the lights. And even when the outside world threatened the game, the Australian Open pushed through. In 2020, bushfires around Australia caused smoke hazards that affected qualifying matches. A stark reminder that the slam battles aren't only on court. The Australian Open adapted, survived, and carried on. One more for you. In 2013, Victoria Azarenka stormed to her first Grand Slam at the Australian Open, walking off with a straight-set win and taking the world number. One crown. It wasn't a five-set war, but for her, it was a career-defining breakout. And a moment that showed the Australian Open could birth new champions just as easily as it could crown legends. That's what makes the Australian Open more than a tournament. It's a stage for comebacks, rivalry, resilience, and raw emotion. Every match has the potential to become a video you'll watch on repeat. Because the Australian Open doesn't just create champions, it creates memories. If this breakdown leveled up your tennis knowledge, hit like, drop your favorite Australian Open memory below, and subscribe to Tennis Explainer for more smart, fun tennis deep dives. See you in the next one.